Sound, audio and sound effects are three key components to any film, which without simply wouldn't make a film. Sound allows directors and producers to convey emotion, drama and suspense to their films. In some cases, it is the film's soundtrack that makes the film. An example of this is Steven Spielberg's Jaws with its iconic suspense track leading up to a shark attack. Sound effects create a sense of realism in film, conveying how animals may sound. A Tyrannosaurus Rex from Jurassic Park is a sound that was being created rather than recorded.
Boy, do I hate being right all the time.
However, not all films started with sound. How was sound first implemented in film? Sound was first implemented through two main methods. The first of two were called talkies, sound recorded after filming and put over and synchronized with footage. One of the earliest known examples of talkies in films was in Warner Brothers' The Jazz Singer, whereby music and speech were synchronized with visuals. The second way of implementing sound was with live orchestras. This essentially meant live bands would play music during a cinematic production. The Lumiere brothers were the first to use live orchestras during their films, and it's believed that this was the start of the golden age of Hollywood. Other forms of live sound were also being used. In Brazilian cinemas, live singers would perform behind the screens as to hide the source of music. While in Japan, a narrator, known as a benchi, would often narrate the story and occasionally add voices to the characters. Sound is an important part to any film, so how was it being developed through the early stages of cinema?
Fox released its first sound feature in September on the 23rd. This feature was called Sunrise. Another film called Don Juan's Soundtrack involved a musical score and sound, which, along with a few crowd scenes, involved wild, non-specific vocal effects. Not until May 1928 did the Big Four studios finally sign up for production facilities to be converted so they could make sound films. In this time, Warner Brothers had filmed 3 talking features, which, because of the use of sound, were all a major success. Warner Brothers' film Tenderloin was the first feature where all the actors spoke their own voices. Of all the 88 minutes of the film, only about 15 minutes was the voices. After this film, sound and dialogue was used more and more in the films. Gloria's Betsy, about 31 minutes of the feature was sound. The first all-talking feature, Lights of New York, was released July the 6th, 1928. Because of sound, it grossed $1.25 million. In September, The Singing Fool was released. It conferred the music's musical ability to convert sound and films. In September 1928, also saw the release of Paul Terry's Dinner Time, which was among the first of many animated features that were created with the use of synchronized sound. Soon after Walt Disney saw Dinner Time, he released his first ever talking feature called Steamboat Willie. During 1928, Warner Brothers started to make huge profits. This was due to the popularity of sound, and other companies soon followed. Paramount produced its first ever sound film called Beggars of Life, although it only had a few lines of dialogue. Paramount's first all-talker debuted in September. Studios were not fully confident of talkies' international success. The majority of Hollywood movies were produced in sound and silent versions. A film called Points West, which was a Hoot Gibson western and released by Universal Pictures, was seen as the last ever purely mainstream feature released by any Hollywood studio.
Though the release of talkies may have saved the film industry, there was still hesitation towards using synchronous sound in the cinema. In response to the success of the first commercial talking picture, The Jazz Singer, most movie theaters were outfitted with a basic binaural sound system. Many engineers in many countries had been working to improve this embryonic technology, but because of initial skepticism, cinema owners felt no need to upgrade. Consequently, the development of cinematic sound became a neglected cause and was sent to the back burner. Sound was the salvation of cinema, but what would be the salvation of sound? The answer, rock and roll music. In the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, film audiences were satisfied with the mono sound systems in place at the time. The 1960s, however, brought in a whole new generation of moviegoers. This new audience was trained and accustomed to the sound quality of cassette tapes and high-fidelity stereo systems. As the sound in homes advanced, the sound in the cinema had to move forward too. Still, there were complications holding film audio technology back. There were standardization issues, meaning theaters had to have enough space and money to house multiple systems in case film was encoded differently, and the limited improvements weren't significant enough to justify the cost of upgrading. Ray Dolby and the Dolby Laboratory stepped up to the challenge. They revolutionized the sound industry with their stereo program and created a universal sound system that was both high quality and cost effective. It was immediately accepted as the industry standard.
Out of that, we have another word of play in the whole industry, and that is something called THX. Now, THX comes out from George Lucas and his specifications. He's worked with a professor by the name of Tomlinson Holman, and Tomlinson created a movie house standard for George Lucas. So we ended up by having movie houses coming up to a specification level which would then be able to incorporate the THX sign symbol on their doors, and this became a commercial byproduct which then went into the component industry, in other words the amplifiers as such, and people would then be buying amplifiers marked THX. Now this is not a sound system, this is purely a specification level which was incorporated into George Lucas's, shall we say, movie empire industry, and people had to pay him to be able to use the THX logos.
Star Wars: A New Hope, released in 1976, was the first major film associated with Dolby Stereo. Since then, apart from one exception, every single Oscar winner within the sound categories has used a Dolby encoded soundtrack. Because of the impact they had on the sound industry, the last few decades of the 20th century have been dubbed the Dolby era. These engineers, sound technicians, and audio visionaries have brought us step by step into the 21st century, from monophonic to stereophonic to the crystal clear sound we are able to experience today.
So you've seen how sound's been introduced into film and television, and what sound technologies we're using today. What do you expect to see in the near future? Well, Matthew Meadows posted an article on EuroDM a few months ago about the development of 4D sound, which he claims will undoubtedly revolutionise the way music's listened to. With current technology, most sounds emitted through only up to 7 channels via computer speakers, headphones or cinema systems. However, with the 4D sound system created by Paul Uhlmann, 57 audio channels are generated via 48 omnidirectional speakers and 9 subwoofer speakers. The combination of these speakers creates a 360-degree surround sound experience, a seemingly perfect addition to 4D films. Although the idea of 4D sound seems intriguing for film and music lovers, it can also be considered a waste of money for other sectors in the media. I interviewed Spats Crawford, who's a technical manager here at Theatre Royal in Winchester, to see what he thought about its technology and whether or not it has a place in theatre.
4D sound is something that I don't personally think will work in theatre. There is a tradition about theatre having that fourth wall which should never be broken by the actors. Actors can look through it, and when you take the technology beyond that wall into the auditorium and start directing sound from different areas, I don't think that would work in a traditional theatre. It might work in an immersive space, sort of in a music centre, possibly with some sort of dance, when the dance takes you in and around the audience. Having the sound coming from different areas might work. But I think if you can direct the sound from what is supposed to be the source, which is i.e. the stage, within an enclosed proscenium arch, then I don't think 4D sound will work.
So the question remains, what do you expect to see from film companies in the future regarding sound? Well, it's quite likely that 4D sound will continue to grow as a concept in both the music and film industries. There's a series that will be able to generate music using the power of our minds, and even development into 3D audio headsets for visually impaired, which just goes to show how much sound industry has amplified.